All right. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks, Megan, for helping me put together the slides for today. Melissa's going to kind of be moderating things as we go along. Thank you, Margarita and Scott, for joining us to kind of talk about your experiences with graduating. And then I'll kind of lead in as well. We're going to start with just kind of the nuts and bolts of kind of the graduation. I'm going to share my slides. I can figure out share screen. All right, we should be sharing now. You see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts of graduation. So first of all, what is the timeline and how does this look? So first, January or February, start talking to your third-year fellows with a list of requirements, deadlines, reminders about SOC meetings. Depends on your program. Here we require for the majority of our fellows a paper, so just reminding them that that timeline is coming up in May or June, and I would recommend these being in May, doing your SOC meetings and your CCC meetings, because you do have to start doing the ABP portals in June. But you have to submit your milestones. We will have the milestones 2.0, and here's a plug for Monday of next week, where we'll have the webinar on the new 2.0 milestones. And then early June is when you start to submit all of this stuff to the portal. It is a lot easier of a process than it used to be. It used to be a bubble sheet that had to be mailed with all sorts of stuff, and it's much easier now. And then towards the end of June, you want to do exit interviews, graduation party, and make sure you explain to the leaving fellows the importance of MOC and letting them know about registering for the boards and things of that nature. So what are the requirements by the ABP? And this is off the ABP website. So clinical, you have to be meeting all of the milestones. EPA's independent practice. We haven't moved to the EPAs. Is this maybe something that someone else can kind of discuss? I know they're coming more and more into practice. And completed greater than or equal to 13 months of service, no specific call volume requirement. And then scholarship is a work product. So this can be a wide range of things. And this is kind of where the SOC really needs to come in and decide, has the fellow met the SOC requirements? For the most part, the board relies on the SOC to say that that is a sufficient work product. So it can be a paper. That is really the easiest thing, is to have a submitted manuscript. But it should be something that really talks about their fellowship. It shouldn't just be a case report. That doesn't necessarily meet the requirements. It could be a grant application. I've had fellows that haven't, they've done a lot of bench research, or they've done a really big project and it just hasn't led to a manuscript. It didn't work out the way. They can write a paper basically saying what they did during fellowship and why it meets scholarship requirements. They should complete their QI work, and then they need to sign off by all 3 SOC members, remembering that one of those must be outside of the division of neonatology, and then be in good standing with the program with no serious professionalism issues. Again, back to the scholarly work. It can be a lot of things: a peer-reviewed publication, an in-depth manuscript. This is what I talked about, of describing a completed project. People who have gotten advanced degrees in their thesis, extramural grants that have been very large grants that have received favorably reviewed. Again, the progress report is an option too. They used to have to write a personal statement. We should note that that is no longer a requirement. They do not have to write personal statements anymore. They just have to submit their work product. And all of this is submitted through the ABP portal now. That all program directors should have access to their portal. This is the portal. So if you do not have access to this, you need to call the ABP and make sure that for some reason your program. So when I log in with my own name into my own portal, I have a program portal that is up here in the upper left-hand corner. And I click on that. And so you can see this is my own, I am certified. And then it will open up into this page, which is a great resource. This is making life a whole lot easier than it used to be. But the things that you can see here is one, that you have evaluations due. So you can see that right now I've actually completed ours because we've already had our CCC. And so you can see, and it will tell you if you have off-cycle evaluations. These are fellows that may have started off-cycle, that have taken leave for any reason. So those don't come up at the same time as the majority of your fellows. It will also tell you a roster of your current fellows. When the site exam comes around, it will tell you if they have registered for the site exam. And it also gives you in this portal the reports of who passed the neonatal boards from your program and the site exam scores. So all of that is in the portal. When you go in and you pick an evaluation to do with the final fellow, so these are your third year fellows, there's going to be a lot of information you're going to have to give, and it's very straightforward and you kind of just walk through it. But first thing you want to do is that you want to verify the training dates are correct. And this is something that you do every single year. And so these training dates and this satisfactory is something that you've done for these fellows every year in June to move them to the next year of fellowship. And those are those evaluations. And then you're just going to go through and just say whether they were satisfactory or not on all of the different basically clinical scholarly activities. So you're going to verify all that. This is where I think all of us kind of have a different interpretation of what numbers you put into the time dedicated to clinical training, time dedicated to non-clinical training, and the total. I have always put 12 and 24. It seems to work out. There hasn't been a problem. There's some people that take an account vacation and they take them out and they figure that out. The one thing I will say is if you had a fellow that took parental leave, you do have to account for that. So you do have to state, if you ask for a waiver, that they had 2 months less, and you would take it out of the non-clinical training time. So that is something I'm going to talk a little bit about the waivers, because I've learned quite a bit about the waivers in the last 2 weeks, because it's a new thing that the AVP does offer waivers. And then you need to say that they participated in a core curriculum and that they have a work product that they submitted. And this is where you will upload their work product. When you say yes, it'll open up a whole nother page like this, and you will have to upload it. Notice the name of it and how you're supposed to name them. And you just upload it. Very simple to do. Some pointers. So you want to verify that the SOC members are listed correctly and that you have their correct email address. This information is stuff that the AVP will then send to the SOC members for their, basically they have to certify that this is correct and that the fellow did meet it. And so during their SOC meetings or final ones, I make it a point to tell the SOC members, especially members that are not in pediatrics, that they will receive an email from the AVP. Please do not ignore this email. It's a really important email. They have to verify the SOC, and this will come sometime in the next 6 months. I don't exactly know when it comes. And then how to handle waivers and FMLA and parental leave. This is not as straightforward as I thought it was going to be. I thought I just kept doing everything that I do, and I put the fellows in as finishing their fellowship dates. That's not correct. And this is something that I'm going to kind of walk through. So the year your fellow takes leave, you are to extend their dates for that year by however many weeks they take leave, not including vacation. For example, Dr. Neonate started their fellowship on July 7th, 2021. So their F1 dates are 7/7/2021 to 7/6/2022. Dr. Neonate had a baby in September of 2022, which is their F2 year. They took 8 weeks of PPL. So their F2 dates are now going to be 7/7/2022 to 9/1/2023. You must account for the weeks in the year that they took their PPL. This is where I made the mistake this year. Dr. Neonate, you decide, has met all their clinical and scholarly requirements and is deemed appropriate to graduate on 7/6/2024, which is where they should have graduated, which is on time. Within 3 months of that date, you can request an absence of training waiver. And that is when you go in, it's right here on the portal again, absence of training waivers. And you basically have to say all of these things, that you've communicated the waiver with the trainee, the times being waived for parental leave, medical leave, or caregiver leave. They're not permitted for any other reason. The trainee is in the final 3 months of training. They've met all of their clinical competencies. They've met all of their elective time. They've met all of their research requirements. They have a scholarly product. You attest to all of that. You submit the waiver, and then you wait. And you wait for them to get back to you to say they approve it, and then their dates switch back 8 weeks. And so that's where, when you're doing those weeks, you actually have to take into account that they took 2 months if you put in PPL.
And Brooke, I thought if they took 6 weeks, that there were definitely people who are just pulling the 6 weeks out and not turning in a waiver.
Yes, I think people are doing that. I don't think if it is not part of their vacation, you're not supposed to do that.
Okay.
That is at UVA, we have to give 8 weeks of PPL. That is a UVA policy. And that's what the AVP recommends, is that we give all of our trainees 8 weeks. Again, that is up to each individual program, how they handle it. This is the way that we are supposed to be doing it. I spent over an hour on the phone with the AVP 2 weeks ago, figuring this out. So I'm trying to give you a little bit of the knowledge I have learned. How many weeks is 13 months? They're not really interested in granular weeks, just use your judgment. I count night float weeks as clinical weeks. I don't count individual calls. Some people count individual calls. So it's all very granular, and you kind of have to decide as a program. And remember, it's a minimum of 12 months clinical, 24 months. A lot of programs are doing closer to 15, 16 months of clinical and less scholarship. So it's a minimum of 12 and 12, and the middle is kind of fudgeable. This is where counting leave is important. You cannot be waived for convenience. That's what I talked about. And it can't be for people that started late. So if you had a fellow that started in September because of parental leave during residency, you cannot waive 2 months worth of their fellowship to move them back to ending in July. No credit is given during pediatric residency. Can they pass a neonatology fellowship without passing the PEDS boards? Again, this is program specific. Our program does not have the requirement that you have to pass the PEDS boards to graduate fellowship. Some programs I know do. For our standpoint, it is my belief and our program's belief that we're focusing on their clinical competency as a neonatologist. The ABP will not make them eligible for the boards if they don't pass their PEDS boards. So yes, you can say from a scholarship requirement and from a clinical competency requirement, they have passed their neonatology fellowship. And you can submit that to the board, and then the board will make the decision that they are not eligible for their neonatology boards because they have not passed their PEDS boards. The cycle does start though when they finish their fellowship. So if they haven't passed their PEDS boards, they're not going to be eligible. Say they're the first neo boards that are being offered are the next spring. They're not going to be eligible to take those boards because you have to register before they will get the results of their next PEDS boards. So they will not be eligible, which means that they will have 2 less years, I guess technically 3 less years to pass the neonatology boards, because they still only have 7 years to pass the neonatology boards from the day they finish fellowship. How long can
I will say it's hard for them to find jobs is the only caveat that we had one and otherwise very well qualified, and they really struggled to find a position that would accept someone who hadn't passed their PEDS boards.
We had one this year, and she is going to be a neonatal hospitalist.
Yeah.
She was able to find a job as like a pediatrician, a board eligible pediatrician.
Yeah.
But you're right, it is a very difficult thing. How long can your training be interrupted? You can be interrupted for 12 continuous months, and then you're going to have to apply to the ABP. Can the graduate take their NICU boards in the same year if graduating off cycle? Yes, as long as they are finished by the time that they must register for the pediatric boards or for the neonatology boards. So if they don't finish for 6 months, they're probably not going to meet that requirement. If they're 2 months off, they're probably going to meet that requirement. How do you navigate dual integrated fellowships? There's petitions that you can do that you should do as early as possible in the training. I am going to let other people kind of take over when it talks to the struggling fellow.
Yes. So I think all programs at some point have a fellow that is struggling and you fear for their ability to graduate or graduate on time. And so the earlier you can identify that someone is struggling and try to help them get to graduation, the better. You can offer anything that you as a program or your GME is willing to, but I think the key thing is that really everybody who's struggling should be seeking some sort of mental health. Like if you didn't have a contributing mental health issue to your struggle, now that everybody is talking about it and discussing your graduation status, that's going to give you a mental health challenge. One of the other benefits of this is sometimes that allows them to access different resources like test taking skills or anxiety management or things that might be contributing. As a program and a program director, your primary goal should be to document the things that you're doing and talking about so that everybody understands what's been said thoroughly and what's been offered and the timeline for those things. The sooner you talk to your GME office that you have a concern, the better. They keep notes on all the meetings they have. So if you're having someone who's really struggling, even in their first 3 months of fellowship, call the GME office, set up a meeting and just here's what I'm seeing. Here's what we're documenting. Here's what I'm trying to do. Can you help me understand X, Y, and Z and what our policies are and whether or not I should be documenting things differently. They will also encourage you to set a healthy boundary with this person. It's really frustrating when we have only a small, tiny group of learners and we want so much for them to succeed. And you're getting phone calls from your faculty members and you've got a fellow in your office crying that things are not going well. This can get really, really tricky to draw a healthy boundary around. If this is something that's just not working out, you can't be trying to drag this fellow to graduation more than they are trying to get to graduation themselves. And there's times when it's not a great fit. Maybe your clinical environment is not a great fit, or you don't have the, they're not the right professional environment for this person. And it's not a failing as you as a PD. The more that you've documented your efforts and you've met with GME and you've met with your division chief and you've been transparent about your efforts, the less likely people are to be frustrated that this is a program director issue. All right, next. Okay. So the sooner that you can share that graduation may be something that is not going to happen or not going to happen on time with the fellow, the better. Nobody should be surprised in their last 6 months of fellowship that there is a concern that might impact graduation. If you are foreseeing that graduation may be something a little harder for this person to get to, you will need to require comments in your evaluations. Yes, we should be getting comments and evaluations anyways, but if you're seeing in your evals, you're getting no comments or really generic, unhelpful comments, go back to that faculty member. These are not anonymous evaluations, and the faculty really need to provide more context for why they're providing a score. And especially if they've called you to express a concern, and then you see an eval go through with like okay scores and no real comments, then you need to go back and get them to fill out a more thorough evaluation. Your CCC will need to document that conversation that you've gone through the numbers, you've discussed the comments, and here's what you think should or shouldn't be addressed to get us back where we need to be. Your semi-annual review form then needs to reflect that conversation, as well as reflect what was said to the fellow about that, their response, and the agreed upon plan. Then the fellow's ILP, their individual learning plan, needs to mirror the semi-annual review and CCC information so that it's very clear that they have heard what the area of concern is and have identified goals. So if you're someone who, your ILPs are more cursory, this would be a fellow that you would really require a more stringent and listed plan for this fellow. If scholarship is the problem, this is something that you want to have timelines and task lists, and you may need to get really directive with the mentor and fellow. Hopefully someone from program leadership is attending SOCs in general to sort of keep people on goal, but you may need to set up a regular meeting with people to really see how things are going and get some viable work product for submission. Each and every time you meet with the fellow to discuss these things, the CCC, the semi-annual review, their feedback, specific events or phone calls, send a summary email back to that fellow. You can BCC, your APD if you need to, but basically you want to create a record of all the conversations had. And at the bottom of those emails, you want to ask the fellow to just confirm via email that they don't have any edits to that. Okay, and that sets you up for good shape in case you need to have more conversations. Okay, next. So if the concern continues to grow and you're going to go down sort of an academic remediation system, and it varies by GME, there is something called academic due process. And there's 3 things required for that. So 1, there has to be a notice given to the learner. So that should be your semi-annual review form, as well as you could write a more formal email after your semi-annual review. They have to have an opportunity to respond. That could be an opportunity to write out a plan. That could be an opportunity to meet with you and your GME. That could be an opportunity to respond to the email. If the concern being raised is very serious, like serious professionalism breaches, they are not required to be given an opportunity to cure the situation, just to respond. So if there's been a egregious breach of professionalism, they can certainly write a letter back saying that, this isn't what happened or whatnot, but you aren't required necessarily to give them an opportunity to fix whatever went wrong. And the third part of academic due process is a careful and deliberate decision-making process. And what my GME interprets that as is time. It needs multiple meetings, discussion, things in writing, and that will show that you've had a careful and deliberate decision-making process. So I've got some listed things for what counts as the different elements here. So these are sort of the phases of remediation. So the one that we do with everybody is the step 1, right? Evaluation, semi-annual reviews, feedback given by individual faculty, individualized learning plans, and your summative evaluations from the CCC. If there's an area that's growing into a more serious concern, your next step will be a focus of concern. That may or may not have a different label at your individual program, but it's basically a learning plan, some sort of action plan that you guys are going to develop together. This will have the sort of what are the measures that we want to see change? What are some of the things that in the past people have said have contributed to this? And what does the learner and the program director agree are going to be the next steps in order to address that? It's not enough to just say, well, he's going to do better, right? You have to have something in your action plan. You're going to attend a course on something, or you're going to complete a 360 eval on something, whatever that is that you want to see done. If that area of concern or focus of concern does not improve in the timeline that you set out during your action plan, your next options are to do a non-promotion. So you may say, you know what, our CCC has determined that this person is not making progress in their medical knowledge, and they attended a board review course as recommended, but this is still scoring really low, and we're going to ask that they repeat a year of fellowship. They could be placed on probation, but I think most people would opt to offer a non-promotion. If either the fellow declines non-promotion or the issue is really severe, you may go with non-reappointment, which means you end them at the end of a specific year. So you may say, we're not going to renew your contract for a second year, or they may be dismissed for cause, which would be for like a more serious professionalism issue. Depending on the situation, your GME could recommend suspension. You could refuse to certify a board application. So you could say this person has completed the clinical training, but we do not believe they have satisfactorily met their goals. And so we are not going to certify them for the boards. A specific training site could come back and say, hey, I know this isn't a global problem, but at our site, this is an issue, and they could recommend a remediation plan specific to a site. A fellow could be removed from patient care activities, and that might be a part of an investigation period in which you say, there's been a patient care concern raised, and we're going to take you off of patient care activities while we investigate, what happened here. They could be chosen, they could basically violate their employment contract and be fired from the hospital. They could be placed on paid leave if it's unclear what's happening. So we've had a situation in our GME where someone was accused of something that wasn't witnessed. And so they were, GME recommended a paid precautionary suspension while they gathered more information, and then they weren't able to substantiate anything. And so they just brought the person back. And then you could have non-GME departments choose different action plans as well. So those are all of the various levels. All right, go to the next one for me, Brooke. So this just goes over what the formal focus of concern is. This needs to be signed and acknowledged by the fellow. So you need to send it to them as a signable PDF, and then they send it back to you. And then you register that with your GME. It's possible your GME does this through MedHub or some other system. And so you want to check with them before you have it signed. You need a follow-up plan. Are we going to meet every other week? Are we going to, when are we going to check back in with this? And then this is really important to meet with your DIO or your super fellowship director to sort of make sure that they don't have any other ideas. All right, next. I put a couple of resources in here for sort of where you could get information, but there's a nice podcast session on giving difficult feedback. So if you need to disclose to someone that they're at risk of not graduating, I highly recommend that. There's a great podcast on remediation options, things that could be done. The ACGME offers a formal system for 360 feedback. And so if it's a professionalism teamwork issue, you could do the 360 evaluation. And then I put a couple of things on there on exit interviews, so that if you did have someone who struggled but ultimately made it through, you could consider doing an exit interview, figuring out sort of what worked, what didn't work, and using that in your remediation plans in the future. And then I'll put a word in for celebrating graduates who do graduate. I think having a party to celebrate your graduates, like separate from just like saying yay in a division meeting, is really important for morale. It helps the fellows feel special. It's their final graduation. Like, you don't have to go full cap and gown, but like a little something is really nice. A lot of times these are not huge budgeted events. So just, consider asking your division chief for this. We rent out a picnic shelter at a local park. It's $100. And then we do a little bit of light catering. But these are really fun events to bring your division together. So I recommend it. All right, and then we've come up with some Q&A questions just in case, but we want to open it up first for anyone else who has questions for our panelists. And so we have Scott Wheelak, Margarita Vasquez, and Brooke and I are here. Melissa is here. We're happy to answer any questions or talk through any crazy graduation situations you've encountered.
Haven't seen anything in the chat yet, so maybe we should open up to the panelists one of these questions just to get it started while people start doing things. Let's do the second one. That's intriguing. Maybe for each of the panelists, how do you handle deciding to graduate someone your own program wouldn't hire?
So I can start. I can try to start. I think, is it okay to graduate someone that your program wouldn't hire? I think the answer is yes. I think just because they don't fit in with our group necessarily doesn't mean they're not a good neonatologist or they're not, someone that's hireable. They just maybe don't fit in with the group that we have as far as, personalities and things like that. So I think, really talking with that fellow and, talking about the differences and why you're not going to hire them. You can always say you don't have room in your program, you don't have any open availability, but really, stress that looking for a place to work that you're going to fit in well with your family and, kind of what you're looking for, your research, your clinical activities. So I don't think it's a bad thing to graduate someone who we wouldn't hire in our program. And I have to say, we've done this a few times.
Yeah, I was going to say, we have it come up every few years. And I think we have usually used the reason of we just don't have room, which is legitimate. If you don't have FTEs, you don't have FTEs. I think practice style is something I will often emphasize to trainees too, and think about, do they really want to be in a, 50, 60, 70 plus bed level 4 unit with all of the multidisciplinary ones, or would they be better in a level 3 unit that's maybe 20, 30 beds? I think it's working with them. And certainly before, time comes up, that's one of the things we do during our semi-annual reviews, is thinking about career development and what type of practice do you think you want to be in? Are you somebody who wants to continue academics? And we've had a lot who have been outstanding clinically, but don't have the interest or the aptitude to stay in academics. So I think recognizing that and helping the fellow realize that before the job search is really important too.
I guess for question number 1, what types of remediation have people recommended? I know you proposed the different levels. I think what I used, again, struggling fellows are present in every program, and one way sometimes to in our institution there is actually due process guidelines, and then it always starts with the letter of concern, like detailed according to them, milestones and domains of competence, and they tell us that it needs to be as objective as it can be, and it has to be focusing on the 6 domains of competence. And in our institution, actually, there's, for example, communication and professionalism. Those are open for mediation, and therefore while, you know, deficit in medical knowledge and in patient care are different levels. So sometimes trying to document all of those is important and can be very daunting to task for the program director. But I think short of like delaying graduation, sometimes replacing research months with the clinical months can be one way to remediate. So, you know, ask the struggling fellow to do maybe 2 more rotations, 2 more NICU rotations in exchange of less research months, if the deficit is mainly in patient care and medical knowledge. So that's kind of one, you know, one proposal to do that. And then as somebody who went through this, I think documentation is very, very important. I cannot really emphasize how important is that. And it has to be objective, it has to be transparent. And you know, trying to, you know, when we're writing the letter of concern, trying to compare the struggling fellow to his peers, his or her peers, and trying to compare his or her to national average. So nowadays, there is a published guide, you know, large document PDF file from the ACGME that actually gives you the median and the interquartile range for all fellows across the nation. So sometimes mapping the milestone of this struggling fellow to the national data can be very helpful.
Faiz, if I can jump on that, is very good thoughts. I think one, you emphasize documentation. That's really important because you're going to, and I don't want to think of it as making a case, but you really need to come up with good, solid, objective rationale of why you're asking the fellow to do additional rotations or additional remediation. I know that a lot of times faculty may, you know, catch you in the hallway or email you and tell you the fellow's struggling, but not put it down on paper. And I think, you know, Brooke and Megan mentioned that, but definitely have it show up in their reviews. And I agree, the extra clinical rotations I think are helpful, but trying to make sure you emphasize a point, like if it's whether it's procedural, whether it's patient care, whether it's communication, really, if you're having to do extra rotations, to emphasize why, I think is really important. And then the third thought, you had so many great thoughts there, Faiz. The third thought I had was, and you brought up too, comparing fellows. It's a trap I think we all fall into, and all of us are like, I have outstanding fellow X who is like the awesomest fellow in the world. Every fellow should be like that. And let's, you know, I think it's fair not to judge a fellow of why aren't they the, you know, the top of the batch. I think we all know that the programs have that potential, but it's important to look at what is the standard, what is the appropriate rationale that a fellow should have, and not necessarily compare them to somebody who is exceptionally gifted.
Yeah,
So to
we're
kind of
a
piggyback
small
on-
program of 2 people, and we've
Yes.
definitely had years where one is really strong and one is maybe just below average, and the difference makes people feel like that person who's maybe just a little below average is really struggling. And then sometimes it's that, like, are they really struggling, or, you know, is this a normal growth pattern?
And then also just remembering that just because you remediate does not mean fellowship is extended. And I think that is something that also, when you are having these conversations with your fellows that are struggling, it's not that they're definitely going to remediate. If that's why it's important to recognize these struggles early. If you can recognize them in the first year, you may be able to put together, and that's kind of how we have coached it to our fellows. Hey, this is for your benefit. Like, we're going to like come up with a plan to help you that we have to abide by, that you have to abide by. And our goal is that we're going to get you to the point by the 3rd year of fellowship that you graduate on time. And all of this is to try to get you there, but it's a contract between both of us, and it puts more work on us and it's more work on you. But our goal is that you graduate on time. And so the majority of fellows that are struggling and in remediation don't necessarily need more time in fellowship. But if you have this all documented, it does make it a lot easier when you get to the end, if they do need more time. Because if you don't have any of this documented up until the point, your ACGME or your GME is going to be like, why are we going to pay them
Yeah.
for 3 more months? Or 4 more months or 6 more months. And so really making sure all along that you are documenting this, but it doesn't mean that they're going to end fellowship later. I really look at it as a way to help them.
And Brooke, I think you make a good point with the GME paying. Not all programs, and it's not always the GME, sometimes the hospitals who pay the fellows, but not all programs are going to be okay with continuing and extending fellowship. So that needs to be made real clear from the beginning. And that's the importance, at least in our program, to really get in with the GME office initially from the very beginning, in case you get to a point where you have to extend it. There's already conversations happening with the hospital that
Yeah, you don't want to have talked about it with the fellow and then you come back and you find out your GME will not pay for that.
Right.
Like,
Scott, anything else you want to say about FMLA?
Yeah, I have, I've done 10 so far, I think, in the 6 years that I've been here, including 4 at once. 4 of my 9 fellows were on leave. That was during March and April of 2020. Luckily, nothing else like a global pandemic was happening. But what can I say? I think knowing your GME rules is really important. What can you do for vacation? What can you do for sick leave? When can they borrow forward, borrow ahead? Have that stuff down. Know all of that stuff. Of the 10 that we've had, nobody's had to extend their training. We've been able to manipulate vacation time. So, vacation time, sick time. Now it's, there's always that risk. And I tell fellows, like, if you have FMLA leave during your first year, your second year, if something happens where, you have a baby, you have another baby, something else happens, they always understand that, so that they plan their sick time and their vacation time accordingly. I think but the most important thing, yeah, know your GME's rules. Like, if you're new into the program or APD role, that would be one of the first things I'd recommend, is getting a hold of your GME office. And I think pregnancy is the most common FMLA thing for our fellows, for our trainees. So, kind of using that and knowing what those rules are. Because every one of ours is different.
has anyone navigated when part of the CCC or specific faculty think someone shouldn't graduate and others think they should graduate?
I think a lot of times we talk about that this fellow we feel could be a great neonatologist. Like, they're going to be fine. They may not be the best neonatologist at an ECMO center.
Yeah.
And I think that is the honesty that you have to come up with when you're talking to them about the job search. And this goes back to, like, this may not be the greatest location for them, but they really may be a great neonatologist and very capable to doing the job of a neonatologist in a community or in less acute, but maybe just the very high acuity 80 patients is not in their wheelhouse, and that's okay. And I think that's a lot of the trying to figure out and being honest with their future employers. I think that is really important, is when you are going out there they're going to call you. Every program director has to do all of the credentialing stuff, and just being honest. There's nothing that's going to make it really bad for you in the future. Neonatology is a small world. If you are not honest about your graduating fellows with what they can and cannot do, I think that's just really important when you have fellows that are graduating.
Brooke, what do you, or any of the panelists, how do you communicate if you have concerns? Like, if you think a fellow is suited specifically for a certain environment, like if you're like, this person is very well suited for not a level 4, but maybe a level 2 NICU, what mechanisms have y'all used to communicate that?
I wouldn't say, I'd start by talking to the fellow directly, so that they're not applying at those level 4 NICUs when they should know by the end of fellowship that they're not suited for the level 4 NICU. Typically, that's just a conversation throughout the fellowship. And then as far as communicating with the other programs, when they apply, you know, typically I get a phone call or an email, and, you know, through that phone. And usually if they send an email, I'll ask them, please call me, because I prefer talking to them and not having it in writing where they can show up again that Dr. Voss just said you were horrible, whatever. Not that I would say that directly, but I prefer them to call me directly, and then we can discuss and be very honest. You know, they're a good neonatologist in level 2. They're not quite at the level for level 4 yet. They may get there with more work and more experience, but at this time, I would put them at a level 2 or level 3 with added supervision.
I've been very honest with my fellows about what I'm going to tell, because they know that I'm going to get called, and they know that from the get-go. And so I'm very honest with them about what, and I think that's what Margarita goes back to, is just talking to them and having the conversation of like, if they call me, and I mean, part of it is on the new employers, especially the private practice ones. I don't know all the places they're applying, and if they take a job with a private practice, all I can do is when they reach out to me. I can now, if I knew they were going to UNC, where I'm good friends with Melissa, I may reach out to her and be like, hey, I know my fellow is doing this. But it is also on the new employer. And I would say 90% of them reach out to us.
And I would say, I would just encourage them, you know, when I tell them that it's not to say they don't deserve a job there.
Right.
They can't, but that they may need some added supervision or some extra help until they get to that point where they're comfortable on their own.
Yeah, I think to answer the original question, which is, you know, some CCC members think somebody should graduate and somebody should not. I think setting a minimum performance criteria is important, and that comes out sometimes can, you know, if you have a document listing the minimum performance criteria, I think that will be easier to convince some, you know, CCC members that think that somebody should or should not graduate.
Just remember, it's all very subjective.
Yeah, that's been our problem.
That's the problem, is a lot of that is subjective to each individual faculty. And so I think minimum procedures, that's easy. Minimum,
yeah, if you set a minimum milestone, I mean, people just give that number. You know, I don't know.
well, hopefully the new milestones will be a lot
little
easier
tighter.
because they actually, I don't know what half of the old ones mean.
Yeah.
To a neonatologist.
Yeah, I mean, like for our program, honestly, we don't set a minimum like milestones. But our residency program, the core residency program, they have actually minimum milestones to pass and to graduate. So it may not be a bad idea actually to set a minimum milestone. Some other criteria can be very, very objective. For example, passing the pediatric board. I mean, some programs would not graduate a fellow if they did not pass their pediatric board, or maybe, you know, if you know, minimum site exam in the third year of training, for example. If you have a fellow who's, you know, like who's below the 5th percentile for in training exam, that fellow will not, more than likely will not pass the NICU board, and therefore maybe, you know, you could set that. And I think so we do have a minimum site exam. We have you have to pass your pediatric board before graduation, and we cleared that with our GME, and they said it's okay. I mean, you can set up your own criteria as long as it's objective and it's not outside the mainstream. I think it's allowed.
So Fayez, if you have a fellow in their 3rd year who still hasn't passed the PEDS boards, do you let them go? Do you extend? Like what did your GME?
So for example, I mean, we anybody who fails the pediatric board, they get a letter of consent automatically. And
That's a good idea.
Yeah, so therefore, like we if they fail in the second year, then they may get a second letter of concern, but they are already on notice.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, they will not be surprised by third year for not graduating.
Mm-hmm.
I just have a little bit of a different viewpoint on that. And I think that's great that your program has set that and that's known to all of your fellows. And I think that's great. I guess I personally struggle with, there are some people that really, really have problems with test anxiety and test, like true test issues. And I think trying to help those people, and I guess just in my head, I have a hard time believing we've had fellows in the past that have had excellent medical knowledge. And if they just had an oral boards, I think that they would rush it. And just test anxiety and problems. And so helping them find the right coaches and psychological testing and stuff like that, that maybe they're going to need. And yes, ultimately they cannot practice as a neonatologist if they do not pass their neonatology boards. And they're not eligible, but that is part of the ABP's job, is to make that decision for them. And so I do feel for some of those fellows that test taking is not their strong point. And
We have paid for some to go to the board review
Yeah,
courses in those circumstances, either during second or third year.
we've done that. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, like in our program, there is actually help through they can have like educational testing, and then you can identify people who are struggling for some issues that maybe you can help them with that. And I strongly believe that the site exam is actually a good predictor of the ability to pass the board. So if you have somebody who's really struggling in the site exam in first year, maybe you can identify that person for subsequent counseling, educational testing, and help through the institution. And many, I mean, I think a lot of our institutions, they have probably they have Department of Education, they have people who can administer educational testing and maybe provide help.
There's one question in the chat I wanted to make sure that we had time for before we close out. This question is about faculty being reticent to put things on in documentation. So it says, how do you help your SOC members or other faculty not be scared about backlash in writing down reasons for recommending remediation, especially since it's a small world and the fellow might already show professionalism issues? So does anybody have advice about that?
Everything is a group. When they get presented to them, I have them send me emails. I put it as one big thing that comes from the CCC. They may know who it's coming from, but when you have a problematic, it's not usually just one faculty.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's if it's one person that's driving things, I think that's a bit of a red flag, Melissa. But if you really have a fellow who is struggling, there's probably going to be multiple faculty that have similar concerns. If it'd be rare to have somebody who's just bad clinically for one rotation or 1 month, and not, you're going to get a variety, of that. I think that's part of the joy, I guess, of being in academic medicine is, providing that feedback. I think, which probably comes back, I thought I had earlier, is the semi-annual reviews and stuff none of this should be a terribly big surprise. I think it's really emphasizing rotational feedback, in the moment feedback, real-time feedback is absolutely crucial. That the semi-annual review should kind of confirm what they already know, what you already know, that if you have a fellow that's struggling, it should not come up every 6 months. It should come up every time, whether it's a call, whether it's a week or two clinical rotation. I think you owe it to them. What I tell the fellows, or what I tell the faculty, is like this person is going to be going out and taking care of babies someday, and we put our stamp of approval on it. So it's important to help them, and that we're not, especially if it's an early trainee, you're not punishing them, you're not saying they're bad, you're just pointing out where are their areas for improvement. And this helps us as program people, helps our GME office, it helps us in program leadership to identify the areas we should target and maybe emphasize some of our efforts.
Yeah, we struggle enormously because the Pacific Northwest way of communicating is to never say anything negative. And so it's very hard. So we had to add
Hey,
a
that's
like,
the South.
oh,
Bless
we had
your
to add
heart.
like an anonymous section for like
The
people
Midwest,
to
the
say
Midwest would like to jump
things.
in too.
Like, come on, guys.
I think it's only the Northeast. No, I'm just kidding.
And then I like anonymize the things to the and then it all comes together. It drives me nuts. And then I meet with some individual faculty to like coach them to go back and make a meeting and give the feedback they didn't give. Like,
Excellent. Well, we are at time. We recorded that whole thing because the conversation was so good. So hope that this makes it onto the YouTube and will be helpful to others. So thank you to all the panelists and everyone who presented and everyone who participated.
Everyone enjoy graduation season. It's
yay.
here. Celebrate our fellows.
It's exciting. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.